The digital display beside my bed cast a pale glow in the darkness when my phone began vibrating against the mahogany surface. Late night calls always send a chill through me. You immediately assume something terrible has happened, especially when it's not a simple text but an actual voice call. My name is Catherine, and I'm someone who thrives on routine. My evenings typically conclude with a novel and chamomile tea, the house settling into that peaceful quiet that only comes with an empty home. I reach for the device, squinting at the bright screen through sleepy eyes. Unknown caller. How peculiar. Nearly everyone important was saved in my contacts. I hesitated briefly, that familiar wariness creeping in. But then I considered, what if this was urgent? I accepted the call. Hello? My voice carried the rough edge of approaching sleep. A pause stretched between us. Then, Catherine? The voice belonged to a man, and momentarily I couldn't identify it. Deep, with a tremor that spoke of strain and something tightly controlled. Yes, this is Catherine. Who am I speaking with? It's Robert, Diana's husband. My thoughts scattered. Diana had been my closest companion since university days, closer than blood family in many respects. We'd weathered everything together. Marriages, children, loss of parents, career transitions, the entire beautiful mess of life. Robert, her spouse of nearly 3 decades, was a decent man, steady, dependable, perhaps somewhat reserved, certainly not one for lengthy conversations, particularly with me, and definitely not at this hour. My stomach lurched. Robert, is everything all right? Is Diana safe? Anxiety sharpened my words. My comfortable sitting room, with its gentle lamplight and the fragrance of aged books and lavender, suddenly felt confining. The air seemed charged with invisible tension. I could detect the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a sound normally comforting, but now it merely emphasized the silence stretching from his end. She's finally sleeping, he said, sounding utterly drained. The words seemed exhaled rather than spoken. I didn't wake her. She requires rest. Relief flooded through me, swift and cool, but it was immediately replaced by fresh confusion. If Diana was asleep and presumably well, why was he calling me, sounding as though the world rested heavily on his shoulders? Robert wasn't the type for casual conversation, not even during daylight hours. Our interactions were always pleasant, always warm, but typically with Diana bridging any gaps between us. At gatherings, he'd expertly handle the grill, offering perfectly prepared food with a quiet smile. At their dinner parties, he'd engage thoughtfully, listen more than speak, his gaze often finding Diana's across the room with quiet affection. Robert, you sound troubled. Is something wrong? I pressed gently, sinking deeper into my chair, pulling the soft blanket tighter around my shoulders. The book I'd been reading lay forgotten in my lap. Outside, wind was rising, whistling softly around the house's corners. It was a typical late autumn evening in this part of the country, crisp and somewhat melancholy. He released a long, shaky breath. I could almost envision him, tall, slightly stooped from years bent over architectural plans, his usually neat graying hair probably disheveled. Perhaps he was in his study, surrounded by blueprints and the aroma of coffee, or maybe pacing the kitchen floor, careful not to disturb Diana. Catherine, I apologize for calling so late. I know this is unexpected. It's just, he trailed off, and I heard what might have been him running a hand over his face. I didn't know who else to contact. I feel like I'm losing my sanity. Losing his sanity? This was serious. Robert was the most grounded, stable person I knew. For him to express something like that, alarm bells weren't just ringing, they were clanging. Talk to me, Robert. What's happening? I tried to keep my voice calm, soothing, like coaxing a frightened bird from hiding. I thought of Diana, my vibrant, usually unflappable friend. If something was deeply troubling Robert, it had to involve her or their life together. My heart ached at the thought. We'd all endured so much. Surely they weren't facing some new terrible crisis. It's Diana, he finally said, his voice barely audible, raw with emotion I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't simply worry, it was deeper, more complex. She's not herself, Catherine. Hasn't been for quite some time. And I don't know what to do. I don't know how to reach her. Diana, not herself? I frowned, my mind racing through recent interactions with her. We'd had lunch just the previous week at our usual small Italian restaurant. She'd seemed somewhat tired, perhaps quieter than normal, but I'd attributed it to the season, approaching holidays, work stress. She was a high school principal, a demanding position under the best circumstances. Had I missed something? Some subtle indication that my dearest friend was struggling? Guilt struck me. We prided ourselves on understanding each other completely. What do you mean, Robert? How is she not herself? I asked, trying to keep self-reproach from my voice. The wind seemed to moan louder outside, mirroring the unease coiling in my chest. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked each second, drawing out the tension. She's distant. So distant. His voice cracked on those last words, and it was that crack that affected me most. It was a sound of pure desolation, of a man adrift, watching his lighthouse flicker and dim. It's like she's present but a million miles away, in her own world. She smiles, she speaks, she goes to work, but her eyes are just sad, Catherine, and empty. Sometimes I look at her and it's like I don't recognize who she is anymore. My breath caught. This was far more serious than I'd imagined. Robert wasn't describing a bad mood or stressful period. He was describing what sounded like profound emotional withdrawal. The pain in his voice, the sheer helplessness, was heartbreaking. He was a man who loved his wife deeply, that had always been evident. To hear him speak of her this way, to feel the fear and confusion radiating through the phone, made my own heart ache in sympathy. I thought of all the years they'd built together, their shared history, their comfortable routines. What could possibly unravel that? What could make Diana, my strong, resilient Diana, retreat so far into herself that her own husband felt like he was looking at a stranger? The image he painted of her sad, empty eyes was a stark contrast to the woman I knew, whose eyes usually sparkled with intelligence and humor. Robert, I began, my voice soft, has something specific occurred? An argument? Some bad news? I tried to think of any recent stressors, anything beyond life's usual ebb and flow. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound that seemed to travel through the wires and settle in the room with me. That's just it. There's nothing I can identify. No major fight, no catastrophe. It's been gradual, like a slow fade. At first, I thought maybe it was work. You know how demanding her position can be, especially with the new school board initiatives. Or maybe it was just us aging, the children grown and gone, you know, that empty nest feeling hitting her harder than we anticipated. But it's more than that, Catherine. It's deeper. She's built walls around herself, and I can't seem to find a way through. Every time I try to truly discuss it with her, she just shuts down, says she's fine, just tired. But it's not just tired. I know tired. This is something else. I listened, the silence in my own home amplifying the raw emotion in his voice. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked with measured, almost judgmental rhythm. I pictured Diana, my vibrant, articulate friend, reduced to monosyllables, deflecting her husband's concern. It wasn't like her at all. She was usually the first to dissect a problem, to discuss it until it was threadbare and understood. For her to be shutting out Robert, her life partner, the man she had chosen to share everything with, it was deeply unsettling. And why call me Robert? I asked, not unkindly, but genuinely needing to understand his reasoning. Have you suggested she speak with someone? A doctor, a therapist? I've tried, he said, his voice laced with frustration. Gently, she refuses. Says there's nothing wrong with her, that a good night's sleep won't cure. But she's been saying that for months. And Catherine, he paused, and I could hear the effort it took for him to continue. I'm scared. I'm really scared. I'm scared of losing her, not to someone else, but to whatever this is that's consuming her. The confession hung in the air between us, heavy and terrifying. This wasn't just a husband worried about his wife's mood. This was a man fearing the erosion of the person he loved, the foundation of his life. And he had called me, not her sister who lived several states away, not their family doctor. Me, Diana's best friend. He was reaching out, hoping I held some key, some understanding that he didn't. The responsibility of it, the trust he was placing in me, felt immense. Robert, I said, my voice firm but gentle, thank you for calling me. You did the right thing. We need to figure this out for Diana, for you. He was silent for a moment, and I could almost feel his relief, his gratitude, even across the miles. I was hoping you'd say that, Catherine. You know her better than anyone. Maybe you've seen something, heard something, or maybe, just maybe she'll talk to you. That was the unspoken plea, that I could be the one to breach those walls Diana had built, to reach the friend I knew was still in there somewhere. The late hour, the intimacy of his unexpected confession, the shared concern for a woman we both loved deeply, it created a strange, powerful bond between us. Robert and me, two people in the quiet of the night, united by a common fear and a common purpose. I knew with certainty that settled deep in my bones that this call was more than just a desperate plea for help. It was the beginning of something, a journey into territory none of us had charted before. And as I listened to Robert's ragged breathing on the other end of the line, I realized my own night was far from over. The mystery of Diana's retreat had just landed squarely in my lap, and I knew I wouldn't rest until we found some answers. The wind held a little more insistently outside, as if underscoring the urgency, the quiet desperation of the moment. The old house seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I took a deep breath myself. "Okay, Robert," I said, my mind already starting to work, sifting through memories, conversations, nuances I might have missed. "Tell me everything from the beginning. When did you first notice things changing?" And so he began to talk. His voice, still laced with worry but also with a thread of hope now, filled the quiet of my living room. He recounted small incidents, subtle shifts in her behavior, moments of uncharacteristic silence or sadness that in isolation might have seemed insignificant, but when woven together painted a troubling picture of a woman slowly withdrawing from her own life. He spoke of her losing interest in her garden, a passion she'd nurtured for decades. He mentioned how she'd stopped calling her own sister as frequently, how her laughter, once so ready and infectious, had become a rare commodity. He described finding her just staring out the window sometimes for long stretches, a vacant look in her eyes that chilled him to the bone. As I listened, my heart ached for both of them. For Diana, lost in whatever fog had enveloped her, and for Robert, watching his beloved wife drift away, helpless to stop it. I thought about the vows people make in sickness and in health, and how often we assume that means physical illness. But the sickness of the spirit, the quiet despair that can take root in a person's soul, that could be just as devastating, if not more so, because it was so much harder to see, to understand, to fight. He told me about a particular evening several weeks ago. They were supposed to attend a concert, something they'd both been looking forward to. Diana had loved the composer since she was young, but an hour before they were due to leave, she'd come downstairs not in her evening dress but in her old, comfortable robe. She'd said she had a headache, that she just couldn't face it. He'd offered to stay home with her, of course, but she'd insisted he go, or at least try to sell the tickets. He stayed. They'd spent the evening in near silence, the unspoken disappointment a palpable thing between them. "It wasn't just the concert, Catherine," Robert said, his voice thick with remembered pain. "It was the light that went out of her eyes when she said she couldn't go. Like even the thought of pleasure was too much for her to bear." I closed my eyes, picturing it. Diana, who could rally for any occasion, who loved music with a passion, succumbing to a vague malaise. It was so unlike her. The more Robert spoke, the clearer it became that this wasn't a simple case of the blues. This was a shadow, a heavy cloak of something that was smothering her spirit. And I, her best friend, had been oblivious, caught up in my own routines, my own life. The guilt nagged at me again, sharper this time. "Why didn't you say something to me sooner, Robert?" I asked, trying to keep accusation out of my voice. It wasn't his fault. He was grappling with it himself. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice small. "Pride, maybe? Thinking I should be able to handle it, to fix it. That's what husbands are supposed to do, right? Fix things for their wives." And honestly, Catherine, Diana made me promise not to make a fuss, not to tell anyone. She said she was just a bit under the weather. She can be very persuasive, you know, stubborn. Yes, I knew. Diana's strength could also be her armor, deflecting help even when she might desperately need it. I realized Robert was in an impossible position, caught between his wife's explicit wishes and his own mounting fear. Calling me was an act of desperation, but also an act of profound love. He was willing to risk Diana's anger, her feeling of betrayal, if it meant finding a way to help her. We talked for what must have been over an hour. He unburdened himself, pouring out weeks, months of accumulated anxiety and sorrow. I listened, mostly in silence, occasionally asking a question, offering a word of comfort, trying to piece together the puzzle of Diana's distress. The digital clock on my bedside table now showed well past midnight. The world outside was quiet, the wind having died down to a mere whisper. It felt like we were in a cocoon, Robert and Wrapped in the shared intimacy of this late night call and the gravity of our conversation, there were no easy answers, no sudden revelations. But as he spoke, a resolve began to harden within me. I had to see Diana. I had to talk to her, friend to friend. Maybe, just maybe, I could get past her defenses in a way Robert, with all his love and concern, couldn't. Sometimes a different perspective, a different voice, was what it took. Robert, I said when he finally paused, his voice worn with all the talking, you're exhausted. You need to get some sleep too. What would you like me to do? I don't know, he confessed. I just needed to tell someone who cares about her as much as I do. Maybe, could you try to see her soon? Not in a way that makes her feel ambushed, but just talk to her. See if you can sense what's really going on. She might open up to you. Yes, I said without hesitation. Of course, Will. How about I suggest lunch again later this week? Or just drop by. I can make up an excuse. Thank you, Catherine. He breathed, and the relief in his voice was profound. Thank you. I feel a little lighter just having told you. Like I'm not entirely alone with this anymore. You're not alone, Robert, I assured him. We'll figure this out together. We said our goodbyes, a quiet exchange that felt more significant than all the years of casual pleasantries that had passed between us. As I placed my phone back on the nightstand, the first pale light of dawn was beginning to creep into the sky, painting the edges of my curtains with a soft, pearly glow. Sleep seemed impossible now. My mind was working, full of Diana, of Robert, of the unexpected weight of their shared confidence. I got up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the nascent day. The world looked fresh, washed clean by the night, but I felt a sense of foreboding, a deep unease about what lay ahead. This wasn't just about cheering up a friend who was feeling down. This felt like something deeper, more hidden. Robert's desperate call had flung open a door to a room I hadn't known existed in my best friend's life, a room filled with shadows and unspoken fears. And now it seemed I was being asked to step inside. I thought of Diana's sad, empty eyes as Robert had described them, and a shiver went down my spine despite the warmth of my robe. I knew this was going to be difficult, perhaps one of the most challenging things I'd ever faced in a friendship, but I also knew I wouldn't flinch from it. Diana needed me, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. The dawn was breaking, and, with it, a new, uncertain path was unfolding. I just hoped I had the strength and the wisdom to navigate it. The next morning I woke with Robert's words still echoing in my ears. The normalcy of my sun-drenched kitchen, the aroma of brewing coffee, the cheerful chirping of sparrows outside my window, it all felt slightly surreal, a stark contrast to the heavy secrets shared in the darkness of the previous night. I went about my morning routine on autopilot, my thoughts consumed by Diana. How could I have missed so much? Was I so wrapped up in my own contentment that I'd become blind to the struggles of my dearest friend? I decided I couldn't wait for a prearranged lunch. I needed to see her, to gauge the situation for myself as soon as possible. Robert had said she was still going to work, so confronting her there was out of the question. It would put her on the spot, make her defensive. Her home then. But I didn't want to just show up unannounced if Robert was there. It might feel like a planned intervention, which was the last thing either of us wanted. I sent Robert a brief text, thinking of dropping by Diana's this afternoon with some cookies around midday. Just a casual pop-in. Will she be home from work by then? Will you be there? His reply came quickly. She usually gets home around then. I have a late site meeting. Won't be back till evening. That could work, Catherine. Thank you. And be gentle. Be gentle. Of course I would be gentle. This wasn't an interrogation. This was an act of love, of friendship. The day crawled by. I tried to distract myself with errands, a bit of gardening, even attempting to read the book I'd abandoned the night before. But my mind kept circling back to Diana. I baked a batch of her favorite chocolate chip cookies. The familiar rhythm of measuring flour and sugar was a small comfort. The scent filled my kitchen, a scent usually associated with warmth and easy companionship. Today it felt more like a peace offering, a key to a locked door. Just before midday, cookies carefully packed in a cheerful tin, I found myself driving toward Diana and Robert's house. It was a route I'd taken hundreds, maybe thousands of times over the decades. Their house, a lovely old colonial with a sprawling, garden Diana had poured her heart into had always been a second home to me. A place of laughter, of shared confidences, of countless cups of tea and glasses of wine. But today, as I turned onto their familiar street, a knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. What would I find? Would Diana be the friend I knew, or the distant stranger Robert had described? I parked by the curb, took a deep breath, and smoothed down my sweater. Just be yourself, Catherine, I murmured. Be the friend you've always been. I walked up the front steps, noticing little things that seemed slightly off. The usually vibrant chrysanthemums in the planters looked a bit droopy, their colors faded. A small stack of newspapers lay by the door, unsorted. These were tiny details, things Diana, with her meticulous attention, would normally never overlook. My unease deepened. I rang the doorbell, its cheerful chime sounding almost too loud in the quiet afternoon. I waited, shifting the tin of cookies from one hand to the other. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow, almost hesitant, approaching the door. The lock turned, and the door creaked open, and there she was, Diana. My first thought was that Robert hadn't exaggerated. She was pale, her usually bright, intelligent eyes shadowed and dull. There were faint dark circles beneath them, the kind that spoke of restless nights. Her smile, when it came, was a ghost of its usual warmth, a polite, fragile thing that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was wearing an old cardigan over a simple blouse and jeans, a far cry from the stylish, put-together woman I knew. She looked depleted, as if the very life force was slowly seeping out of her. Catherine, she said, her voice a little hoarse, as if she hadn't used it much that day. What a surprise. Come in. She stepped back to let me pass, and I walked into the familiar hallway. The house was quiet, unnaturally so. Usually there'd be music playing, or the scent of something cooking, or just the general hum of a lived-in, loved home. Today it felt still, like a photograph of a home rather than the real thing. I was just in the neighborhood, I said, holding up the cookie tin with a brightness I didn't entirely feel. Thought I'd drop these off. Freshly baked, your favorites. Oh, Catherine, you shouldn't have, she said. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes, then appreciation, or maybe just surprise. She took the tin, her fingers brushing mine. Her hand felt cold. Thank you. That's so sweet of you. We moved into the living room, a space that had witnessed so much of our shared history. Birthday celebrations for our children, tearful commiserations over heartbreaks, joyful toasts to new beginnings. The grand piano in the corner where Diana used to play was closed, its surface dusty. The bookshelves, usually crammed with a vibrant disarray of her latest reads, seemed neater, less disturbed. Can I get you some tea? She offered, her voice still low. That would be lovely, Diana. Thank you, I replied, settling onto the sofa, trying to appear casual, relaxed. But my senses were on high alert, cataloging every nuance, every subtle shift in her demeanor. She went to the kitchen, and I heard the clinking of cups, the running of water. The sounds were mundane, normal, yet in the context of Robert's late-night call and my own observations, they felt freighted with unspoken meaning. I looked around the room, at the framed photos on the mantelpiece, Diana and Robert on various holidays, beaming, their adult children, Emily and David, at their graduations. A lifetime of memories, of happiness. What had happened to cloud that? Diana returned with a tray steaming mugs of tea and a plate with a couple of my chocolate chip cookies. She placed it on the coffee table and sat in the armchair opposite me, a little too upright, a little too formally. So, she said, picking up her mug, what brings you to my neck of the woods, really? Besides plying me with delicious cookies? There was a hint of her old teasing tone, but it felt forced, like a well-rehearsed line. I took a sip of my tea, stalling for a moment, choosing my words carefully. Honestly, Diana, I just wanted to see you. It felt like ages since our lunch, and I just had a feeling I should check in. She looked at me then, a direct gaze, and for a second I saw a flicker of the old Diana, the perceptive friend who could read me like an open book. Her eyes searched mine, and I wondered if she could sense the unease, the concern I was trying so hard to mask. Well, I'm here, she said, her voice softening slightly. Same old, same old. You know how it is. Work's been hectic. I can imagine, I said. The end of the semester rush, parent-teacher conferences, all that fun stuff. I was trying to give her an opening, a familiar topic she could latch onto. She nodded but didn't elaborate. She took a cookie, nibbled at its edge, then placed it back on the plate. Her appetite, it seemed, was as diminished as her energy. An awkward silence descended. Something that had rarely, if ever, happened between us. We could usually talk for hours about anything and everything, our conversations flowing effortlessly. This silence was different. It was heavy, filled with unspoken things, with a distance that felt new and alarming. I decided to take a gentle plunge. "You seem tired, Diana," I said softly, my voice full of carefully modulated concern. "More than usual, I mean. Is everything really okay?" She avoided my gaze, looking down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "Just a bit run down, Catherine. Nothing a good long weekend won't fix. I'm probably just anemic or something." Her voice was flat, dismissive. It was the same response she'd given Robert. The wall was up, solid, impenetrable. I pressed on very gently. "You know, if there's anything on your mind, anything at all, you can always talk to me. That's what friends are for, right?" I tried to inject warmth, reassurance into my tone. I leaned forward slightly, trying to bridge the gap that seemed to have opened up between us. She finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with a weariness that went bone deep. But there was something else there, to a flicker of. Was it defensiveness? Or perhaps fear? "There's nothing to talk about, Catherine," she said, her voice a little sharper now. "I appreciate your concern, I really do, but I'm fine. Just tired. Everyone gets tired." She picked up her cookie again, took a more determined bite this time. As if to prove her point, as if the act of eating could somehow demonstrate her normalcy, my heart sank. This was going to be harder than I thought. She was shutting me out, just as she'd shut out Robert. The vibrant, open woman I knew seemed to be receding before my very eyes, replaced by this guarded, weary stranger. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. I owed it to her, to Robert, to our long years of friendship. I decided to change tack, to try a different approach. Perhaps directly addressing her feelings was too confrontational. Maybe I needed to come at it sideways. "Well," I said, forcing a smile, "if you ever do need a listening ear, or just a distraction, you know where I am. We could go for that spa day we kept talking about, or just a long walk in the woods. The autumn colors are beautiful right now." Her expression softened a fraction. "Maybe, Catherine. That sounds nice. But I'm just so swamped at the moment. Can we put a pin in it?" A pin in it. The classic brush off. My hope, which had been a fragile flame, flickered. It felt like I was treading water, making no headway against a current I couldn't even see. The comfortable living room, once a haven, now felt oppressive, charged with an unspoken tension that was almost unbearable. I looked at my friend, this woman I loved like a sister, and saw not just tiredness, but a profound unhappiness, a deep-seated sorrow. She was trying desperately to hide, even from herself, and I had no idea how to reach her. The cookies sat between us, a symbol of a connection that felt suddenly, terrifyingly fragile. The afternoon sun, slanting through the window, cast long shadows across the room, and it felt like the shadows were winning. I knew I couldn't push too hard. Not today. But as I prepared to leave, a sense of failure and a renewed wave of anxiety for Diana settled heavily upon me. This was only the beginning, and the path ahead looked darker and more uncertain than ever. As I drove away from Diana's house, the unease I'd felt earlier had intensified into a knot of genuine worry. Her carefully constructed facade of just tired hadn't fooled me for a second. The Diana I'd seen was a shadow of her former self, her light dimmed, her spirit burdened by something she clearly wasn't ready or willing to share. Robert's late night call, his desperate words, now resonated with an even more chilling clarity. He wasn't overreacting. Something was seriously wrong. The chocolate chip cookies, my peace offering, felt like a pathetically inadequate gesture in the face of whatever deep-seated issue was consuming her. I replayed our conversation in my mind, her guarded responses, the way she avoided my gaze, the forced brightness that couldn't mask the profound weariness in her eyes. It was clear she was deliberately keeping everyone at arm's length. But why? What was she so afraid of? When I got home, my own house felt quiet but comforting, a contrast to the strained atmosphere at Diana's. I immediately called Robert. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with anticipation. "Catherine, how did it go? Did you see her?" "Yes, Robert, I saw her," I said, sinking into my armchair, the same one I'd been sitting in when he called me the night before. It felt like a lifetime ago. And you were right. She's not okay. Not at all. I recounted my visit, describing Diana's appearance, her lack of energy, her dismissive attitude. When I tried to gently probe, I told him about the untouched cookie, the dusty piano, the general air of neglect in a home that had always been so vibrant and cared for. Robert listened, in silence, and I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end. When I finished, there was a long pause. So she didn't open up to you either? He said finally, his voice flat, devoid of hope. No, she didn't, I admitted. She used the same line she used with you. Just tired. Just run down. She's built a fortress around herself, Robert. And it's a strong one. So what do we do now? He asked, the helplessness in his voice tearing at my heart. Do we just wait? Hope she snaps out of it? I don't think waiting is the answer, I said slowly, my mind racing. Whatever this is, it seems to be getting worse, not better. We need to understand what's causing it. Has there been any major stress at work that she hasn't told you about? Any health scares? Anything at all? Even if it seems minor? He sighed. I've been over and over it in my head, Catherine. There's nothing obvious. Her last physical was fine. Work is always stressful, but she's always managed it before. This is different. It's like the joy has been leached out of her, bit by bit. The joy leached out of her. That was a chillingly accurate description. I thought about Diana's passions, her garden, her music, her books, her almost fierce love for her family and friends. If those things no longer brought her pleasure, then the situation was dire indeed. Robert, I said, an idea beginning to form, hesitant but insistent. Is there anyone else? Someone from her work, perhaps? Another old friend I might not know as well? Someone she might have confided in even a little? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. There's her colleague, Michael. Michael Stevens, he's the vice principal. They've worked closely together for years. She always spoke highly of him, said he was a good sounding board. Maybe he's noticed something. Michael Stevens, I repeated, filing the name away. Do you think he'd be willing to talk to me if I reached out? Discreetly, of course. He's a good man, Robert said, and he cares about Diana. I think if he knew we were seriously worried, he might. I can give you his number if you want to. Try. I don't want Diana to feel like we're going behind her back, ganging up on her. I understand that, Robert, I said gently, and I'll be incredibly careful. But if she won't talk to us, we need to find someone she might have talked to, or at least someone who might have a different perspective on what's been happening. We're not trying to betray her trust. We're trying to save her from whatever this is. He agreed, albeit reluctantly, and gave me Michael Stevens's phone number. The thought of calling a near stranger to discuss my best friend's private struggles felt uncomfortable, intrusive even, but the memory of Diana's vacant eyes, the palpable despair in Robert's voice, these things pushed me forward. The next day, I gathered my courage and called Michael Stevens. I introduced myself as Diana's close friend Catherine and explained, as delicately as I could, that Robert and I were deeply concerned about her. I emphasized that we weren't looking for gossip but for any insight that might help us understand what she was going through. To my relief, Michael was receptive and understanding. His voice was kind, concerned. He admitted he too had noticed a significant change in Diana over the past few months. She's always been such a powerhouse, Catherine, he said, his tone tinged with sadness. So dedicated, so full of energy. But lately, it's like she's running on empty. She's still efficient, still does her job, but the spark is gone. She's quieter in meetings, more withdrawn. I've asked her a couple of times if everything's all right, but she just brushes it off, says she's fine. His words confirmed our worst fears. This wasn't just something Robert and I were imagining. It was real, and it was noticeable to others who knew her well. Has anything specific happened at school, Michael? I asked. Any unusual pressures, any conflicts? He hesitated. Well, there's been the usual budget stress, and a particularly challenging issue with a long-term teacher who's been underperforming. Diana's had to handle that, and it's been tough, very emotionally draining for her. I know she cares deeply about her staff, but honestly, Catherine, she's dealt with far worse in her career. This feels different, more personal somehow, more personal. That resonated. Robert had said the same thing. Michael, I pressed gently. Has she mentioned anything about her health or anything at home? Any changes? No, nothing specific about Her health, he said. And she's very private about her home life, as you probably know. Always professional. But there was one thing. Several weeks ago, she seemed particularly down. And I caught her in her office looking at a photograph. She had tears in her eyes. When she saw me, she put it away quickly, but I got a glimpse of it. I think it was a picture of her mother, Diana's mother. My heart gave a lurch. Diana's mom, Margaret, had passed away almost half a decade ago after a long battle with dementia. Diana had been incredibly close to her, and the illness and subsequent loss had hit her very hard. We'd all supported her through it, Robert especially. But grief, I knew, could be a strange and lingering thing, resurfacing unexpectedly. Her mother, I repeated, a new avenue of thought opening up. Was there an anniversary coming up? Her mother's birthday, or the anniversary of her passing? Michael wasn't sure. I didn't want to pry, he said. She seemed so vulnerable in that moment. I just offered her a cup of tea and tried to change the subject to something work-related, to distract her. After I ended the call with Michael, I sat for a long time, thinking, Diana's mother, could this all be a delayed, or perhaps a newly triggered grief reaction? Half a decade was a long time, but dementia was a cruel disease, robbing people of their loved ones long before they physically departed. Diana had been a devoted daughter, shouldering much of the caregiving burden in Margaret's final years. It had been an exhausting, heartbreaking experience for her. I remembered how, after Margaret died, Diana had thrown herself back into work, into life, with an almost ferocious determination. Perhaps too quickly. Perhaps she'd never truly allowed herself to mourn, to process the full extent of her loss. And now, for some reason, that suppressed grief was surfacing, dragging her down into the depths. The photograph Michael had seen it could be a vital clue. I knew what I had to do. I had to talk to Diana again. But this time, I wouldn't just ask vague questions about how she was feeling. This time, I had a specific focus. I needed to approach her not just as a concerned friend, but as someone who understood the unique pain of losing a mother, as I had lost my own years ago. Later that evening, I called Robert and told him about my conversation with Michael Stevens and the potential connection to Diana's mother. Her mom? Robert sounded surprised. Of course she misses her terribly. We all do. But do you really think that's what this is all about? After all this time? Grief doesn't follow a timetable, Robert, I said gently. And dementia, it's a loss that happens in stages. Maybe something triggered those memories, those feelings, more intensely for her recently. An anniversary, perhaps, like Michael suggested. Or maybe it's something less obvious. Sometimes it's not a big event but an accumulation of small things. Or even a period of quiet when the feelings you've been holding at bay finally have room to surface. Robert was silent for a moment. Margaret's birthday was last month, he said quietly. We didn't do anything special. Diana said she didn't want to. I thought she was just being practical. Oh God, Catherine, have I been completely blind? You haven't been blind, Robert, I reassured him. You've been worried and trying your best to understand. Grief is complex. She might not even fully understand it herself, but it gives us a starting point, a way to try and reach her. We decided that I would try to see Diana again the next day. This time, I wouldn't bake cookies. I would just go as her friend, armed with this new understanding, this new empathy. I would talk about Margaret. I would share my own experiences with grief, and I would hope, with all my heart, that this time I could finally break through those walls and reach the friend I knew was struggling inside. The thought of confronting such deep-seated pain was daunting. I knew it wouldn't be an easy conversation. There might be tears, there might be resistance, but I also knew that true friendship meant being there for the hard stuff, not just the easy laughter and good times. As I prepared myself for what lay ahead, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about solving a mystery anymore. It was about helping my friend find her way back to the light, out of the shadows that had enveloped her. And for Diana, I would walk into any shadow, no matter how dark it seemed. The path was still uncertain, but for the first time since Robert's late-night call, I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that we might actually be able to find a way through this. The emotional connection Robert and I had forged in our shared worry felt like a lifeline. And now, with Michael's insight, it felt like we had a compass. The following afternoon, I found myself once again on Diana's porch. This time there was no tin of cookies in my hand, just a heart full of apprehension and a quiet determination. I rang the bell, and again, after a pause, the door opened. Diana looked much the same as she had days prior, pale, weary, her smile a fragile imitation. "Catherine," she said, a hint of surprise, perhaps even guardedness, in her voice. "Back so soon? Can I come in for a bit, Diana?" I asked gently. "I'd really like to talk." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded and stepped aside. The house had that same unnerving stillness. We walked into the living room, and she gestured vaguely toward the armchair she'd occupied before. I chose the sofa again, instead of her offering tea. I spoke first. "Diana," I began, my voice soft, "I've been thinking a lot about you, about us, and I've also been thinking about your mom." At the mention of her mother, a flicker of something crossed her face: surprise, pain, a deep, unutterable sadness. It was there for only an instant before her guard slammed back into place. "But I'd seen it. My mom," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "What about her?" "I was just remembering her," I continued, treading softly, "remembering how much she loved her garden, how she used to bring over those amazing tomato harvests, and how much you're like her in so many ways. Her strength, her kindness." Diana didn't respond, but her hands, resting in her lap, tightened into fists. I knew I was venturing into sensitive territory, but I also knew, with a growing certainty, that this was the path I needed to take. "I also remember how incredibly hard it was for you, watching her fade away with the dementia," I said, my voice filled with the empathy I felt. "It's a cruel disease, stealing someone piece by piece. I saw how much it took out of you, Diana. You were so strong for her, for everyone. But it must have left some deep wounds." Silence. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Each tick marked a moment of heavy, unspoken emotion. Diana's gaze was fixed on a point somewhere beyond my shoulder, her expression unreadable. I decided to share a piece of my own story, to show her she wasn't alone in these feelings. "When my own mother passed," I said, my voice a little thick with memory, "I thought I was handling it well. I went back to work, kept busy, did all the right things. But months later, maybe even a year later, the grief would just hit me out of nowhere. An old song on the radio, a particular scent, a casual remark from someone, and I'd be a wreck. Grief has its own timetable, Diana, and it doesn't care much." For hours, she finally looked at me, and her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. The carefully constructed wall was beginning to crumble. "Robert told me, and Michael from your work also mentioned, that her birthday was last month," I said gently, "and that you've seemed particularly down since then. Is it Margaret you're grieving for so deeply right now, my dear friend?" A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, then another. She didn't try to wipe them away. She just sat there, the silent tears a testament to the pain she'd been carrying alone for so long. "I miss her so much, Catherine," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. It was the first truly honest, vulnerable thing she'd said in days, and my heart ached for her, every day. "But lately, it's been unbearable." "Talk to me, Diana," I urged softly, leaning forward. "Tell me about it." And then the dam broke. The words, the feelings, the suppressed grief she'd been holding onto for so long came pouring out. She spoke of the guilt, the caregiver's guilt, of feeling relieved when it was finally over, followed by the crushing guilt of that very relief. She spoke of the anger at the disease, at the unfairness of it all, at a world that kept turning when her own had been so irrevocably altered. She spoke of the profound loneliness, the gaping hole Margaret's absence had left in her life, a hole that time hadn't seemed to heal but only to deepen. She confessed that as the anniversary of Margaret's passing approached, and then her birthday, all the suppressed emotions had come roaring back with a vengeance. She'd found an old box of her mother's letters, reread them, and it was as if the loss was fresh all over again. She'd started dreaming about her mother, vivid dreams where Margaret was still healthy, still vibrant, only to wake up to the stark reality of her absence. "I felt like I was losing my mind," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "I didn't want to burden Robert. He was so good through it all. But it's been years. I thought I should be over it by now. And at work, how could I tell anyone I was falling apart because of something that happened half a decade ago? I felt so ashamed, so weak." "Oh, Diana," I said, my own eyes now wet with tears. I moved from the sofa to sit beside her on the armchair's edge, taking her cold hand in mine. "There's no shame in grief. There's no weakness in missing your mother. and there's certainly no timeline for it. What you're feeling is human. It's love, Diana. It's all the love you still have for her. With nowhere to go, she clung to my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. But I've been so awful to Robert, she cried. So distant, so cold. He's been trying so hard. And I pushed him away. I didn't know how to explain what was happening inside me. I didn't even understand it myself until you started talking about Mom. Robert understands more than you think, I said gently. He loves you, Diana. He's been so worried about you. That's why he called me. He knew you were hurting, and he just wanted to find a way to help you. Her head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes wide. Robert called. You? I nodded. He called me late the other night, beside himself with worry. He didn't know what to do. He just knew he was losing you. He loves you that much. A fresh wave of tears coursed down her cheeks, but this time they seemed different tears of release. Perhaps even of a dawning understanding. The knowledge that Robert's actions came from a place of deep love, not frustration or anger, seemed to break through another layer of her defenses. We sat there for a long time, just talking. She shared memories of her mother, both happy and sad. She spoke of her fears, her regrets, her profound sense of being adrift. I listened, offering comfort, understanding, and my own shared experiences. I told her about the resources available for grief counseling, for people struggling with loss even years later. I suggested that perhaps talking to a professional, someone outside the family circle, might give her a safe space to explore these feelings without guilt or shame. Slowly, very slowly, I began to see a flicker of the old Diana return, a lightening in her eyes, a slight easing of the tension in her shoulders. The simple act of speaking her truth, of having her pain acknowledged and validated, seemed to be a powerful balm. I feel lighter, she said finally, her voice still thick but no longer choked with sobs. She managed a watery smile. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing me even when I couldn't see myself. Always, Diana, I said, squeezing her hand. That's what friends do. We walk through the shadows together. By the time I left her house that evening, as dusk was beginning to settle, the atmosphere felt profoundly different. The oppressive weight had lifted. There was still sadness, yes, but it was a sadness tinged with hope now, with the possibility of healing. Diana promised she would talk to Robert, really talk to him that very evening. She also promised she would consider looking into grief support. It was a beginning, not an end, but it was a significant step forward. As I drove home, I felt a quiet sense of exhaustion but also a deep, resonant satisfaction. The unexpected late-night call from Robert had indeed led to something incredible. Not a scandal or a drama, but a profound journey into the heart of grief, friendship, and the enduring power of human connection. It had been a discovery for all of us. Robert had discovered a new way to support his wife by reaching out and showing his vulnerability. Diana had begun the journey of rediscovering herself by finally confronting the pain she had carried for so long. And I had rediscovered the profound depth of a friendship I had perhaps taken for granted, and the strength that comes from true, empathetic listening. The road ahead for Diana would likely still have its challenges, but she wasn't walking it alone anymore. And that, I realized, made all the difference. The reflection in my rearview mirror showed my own tired eyes, but they were smiling. The intimacy of shared vulnerability had created an even stronger bond between us all, and a renewed appreciation for the complexities of the human heart. Growth, I mused, often comes from the most unexpected of shared experiences, from those moments when we dare to be truly open with one another. And in that shared openness, we find not only healing but a deeper understanding of ourselves and the people we love.